Hello there all my lovely jewelry makers, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this Cross Wire Macrame unisex bracelet, and it's a really cool design with many different variation possibilities. Now if you specifically like any other pieces in this video, they will be available for sale in my shop along with other jewelry kits and tutorials, so feel free to check that out, you'll find that below the video. But if you just want to learn how to make one for yourself, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll need. First of all, I'm using a regular round copper wire, and the first gauge here is a 0.8mm. This will be our holding wire. And next I have a 0.6mm, and this will be our working wire. Now you can play around with the wire and use different gauges, it will just affect the final result a bit. Now the beads that I'm using are some 6mm gemstone rounds. Again, you can use different sizes, you'll just get some different results. And now to finish off the ends, we're going to need our findings. So I'm using a lobster claw clasp and extended chain and a few jump rings to put it all together. You can of course use whatever clasp you prefer or even make your own. As for the tools, I'm going to be working on this mini macrame board. It has these notches all the way around the edges that makes it really easy to move your wire around. And as for pliers, I've got some flush cutters so we can of course cut our wire, chain nose and tweezer nose pliers to help manipulate the wire. And finally, a pair of 6-step bell making pliers for any loops we need to make. You could also use round nose pliers for this. Now the tool and material list will be in the description box below the video, along with useful links. Otherwise, let's get it all ready and let's get started. Now the lengths of wires that we're going to need is first of all 2 lengths of a 0.8mm here, so the holding wire of about 40 centimeters each. And then we'll need 4 lengths of a 0.6mm here, so the working wire of about 80 centimeters each. So the first thing we're going to do is grab a macrame board, and then I'm taking my 2 lengths of holding wire, so the 2 thick lengths there. I'm going to place them just into one of the slots on my board, just on the short side there, and then bring them down into the opposite slot on the bottom, and then just push them around the back. Now I'm then going to grab my other 4 lengths, and these are the 4 working lengths, and at the top, just make sure they're all even there. I'm going to just place them into the same slot, and on the back, to help them stay in place, we can just gently twist them around the other wire a little bit, just so when we start a macrame they're not going to just pull straight out. And then we need to just separate out 2 of them. So one length is going to go to one side, and another length is going to go to the other side, and the remaining 2 here I'm just going to bring straight down and join them up with the holding wires, and I like to make sure that they're laying in between them, and then just bring them to the bottom and place them into the same slot as well. So it's just for now, they're going to actually be holding wires as well, but only just here in the beginning. Now this is then the wires attached to our board and in position and ready to start some macrame. So the first thing I want to do is just make a few knots around all these wires here to get the bracelet started, just to show you one I've already done, just so we have a nice ending here before it starts to split out and turn into the pattern itself. So I'm just going to use these 2 working wires that were separated out. Now I'm going to just make square knots, and if you're not familiar with how to make basic macrame knots, I do have a video that shows in detail. I'm going to leave a link to that in the description box down below. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what side you start with, I'm just going to start with the left side and then bring that over all the holding wires, take the right one over that, underneath everything in the middle, and make sure you go underneath all of them, and then up through the loop on the other side here. And now you want to tighten this all the way up, pull that nice and tight, and that's the first half of your first knot. Now start with the other side to make the other half. So right one goes over, and then left one goes over that, underneath again, make sure everything in the middle, and up through the loop here on the other side, and then just pull that nice and tight. Now try and have an even tension throughout so the knots get as even as possible. But here we have our first full square knot, and you basically just want to do a few of these. How many is of course up to you, but I generally like to make 3. I feel like that's a nice starting and finishing point that just transitions between the main part of the bracelet and the clasp. So just tighten that. And then to make the other half of that knot, then start with the other side and bring that over, take the other one over that and underneath everything in the middle. Make sure to go under all of them, up through the loop on the other side, and then just pull that nice and tight. So we now have our second knot. And what you'll be able to see on your knots as well is you have one side where you have a little loop and your working wire is coming out underneath that loop, and on the other side your working wire is coming out more towards the top of the knot here. So I always start with the side where the wire is coming out underneath the loop. You can see that closely on your own knots. And then to make the third one, I'm then going to take the wire from that side where that loop is on the previous knot, and then just make my third one. Like that. Pull it tight, and that is also how I can tell and what helps me keep track of the next wire that I need to use. So for instance, if you just took a break but you only made half of that knot, to know which wire you need to start with next, you need to start with the one where you have that little loop and the wire is coming out underneath it. So I know that's the next one I need to start with and complete the knot with the other length, and then pull it tight, and then this completes the full knot. So I now have 3 full square knots there. And this is especially important with the wire because obviously that's not the same as working with cord or another fiber. So you don't really have much forgiveness in the wire. You can maybe just undo a knot and then redo it. But the ideal thing is to not have to do that, because every time you were to do that, you weaken the wire and risk that it's going to break, make it much more likely. So therefore, I try and keep track of my knots in that way. Now from here, we're now going to start splitting up our wires. So I'm just going to release the wires from the bottom slot there on the board. And I like to just smooth everything out as well as I go. Now what we need to do is have one holding wire, so one of the thick gauges there on either side. So just push them more towards the side like that, so they're coming out at an angle. And then also each of the other working wires there in the middle that were the holding wires through this, but now they're going to start being working wires, which is what they're going to be throughout most of the rest of the bracelet. So I've split up my wires here, and we're now going to start working on one side at a time. So we've kind of now got groups of wires. So I'm just pushing that other group out of the way and just starting on this side. So the holding wire, which means the thick one there, in this case I have it in the middle, I'm just going to bring it down towards the bottom just to have it a bit fastened. And then we need to start making square knots around that using these 2 working wires. So I'm going to start with the outer length, bring that over. Now we only have this single holding wire to worry about, and the other one goes over that underneath everything in the middle. So in this case just the one, and obviously the one that's coming over, and then up through the loop here on the other side, pull it through, and then as I'm tightening this, I want this to sit up as close underneath that previous knot as possible. Something a bit like that. And then to finish off that knot, start with the other side, bring that over, and the other one comes over that underneath everything in the middle and up through the loop on the other side, and then pull that tight. Again, try and have a nice even tension throughout. And what I also like to do, because we're working with wire, is every time I pull a knot tight, I always run the wire through my hands and fingers to smooth it out, because if I just leave it like this, you can see it already gets misshapen like that. So just smooth it out, because then it's ready for the next time you need to use it. And that way you also avoid more kinks and bends and have less risk of breaking of the wire. So on this side here, the amount of knots I'm going to do is 3 to basically get the length where we end up to actually then also start to add beads in. So this is what I think fits nicely. So I'm just going to do another knot underneath the previous one, exact same way that I just showed you, the first half, and then I'm going to do the other half, pull that through, and then tighten that. And then the last one, again I'm keeping an eye on that knot that I just finished where my wires are coming out. So this one is the one that has that loop. So I know I need to start with that side, just in case I get a bit confused or forget where I'm at some points. And then we complete the knot with the other side. And this, once we tighten it, will then be our third knot. And the last one on this side. Now you can just kind of gently push these wires a bit out of the way, and then you can move your board around and then get to the other side and make that more convenient. And just place it however you need to. I'm just going to take that thick gauge again that's in the middle, bring it down a little bit, and then we just need to do the exact same thing on this side, but again I'm going to start on the outside. So I'm starting with the opposite side here, but that's just to get the two sides symmetrical. So on every side I'm starting with the outer wire when I'm starting my knot. So bring that over, the other one goes over that, underneath, everything in the middle and up through the loop. And then we pull that nice and tight, and again just get it up as far as it'll go. Now I'll start with the other side and finish with the other length and pull it tight. And again here I'm going to make the same amount, so another 3 knots. And then here on this side I'm going to make the same amount as the first side we just did, so I need to make another 2 for 3 in total. So as you can see here, now that we completed both sides, that's provided us with some width, so we can start to work our way straight down now and get to the main pattern of the bracelet. Just to show you one I've already made. This is that little section at the beginning, just before we start adding beads in as well, which is what we're going to do now before we move any further. So just release your holding wire, so the thick gauge, and start adding your beads. Now how many beads you're going to need obviously depends on the size of bracelet that you want and also the design you're making. So what I personally like to do, it's not a big deal, but I'd rather just add too many beads because you can always then just not use them all. Or of course, if you haven't added enough, you can just take these wires out of the slots and add some more beads. It's not a big deal either way, but I at least want to add a decent amount so I don't have to remove my wire and add a bead every single time I want to add into the design. So they're already here on the length of wire ready to go. We can then reattach these lengths of wire once we've added our beads, and also just kind of gently bend them so they come more straight downwards instead of going out to the side too much. So just where they're coming out from that last knot, and just refasten them in the slots, and then we can just push these beads down and out of the way so we have nice working space up here. So for the main pattern, what we're going to do is kind of work on one side at a time, but we're going to keep jumping back and forth and then creating the pattern here, and in the process also add in a bead at a time. So I'm just going to start with my left side. It doesn't matter where you start or what direction you take wires over and under, as long as you stay consistent throughout, assuming that's the look you're going for. But for instance, I'm just going to start on my left. What I do like is kind of find a rhythm or routine in it that also makes it less likely maybe to make mistakes that you would have to undo and possibly risk breaking the wire. So before we make any more knots, we just need to make sure we're using the right wires, which means to get the design that we want, that cross in the middle, these 2 inner wires, so the 2 inner working wires, they are kind of naturally wanting to go towards each other, so we're just going to let them do that. So I'm going to cross them over, and this is what I mean with having the wires cross over and under each other in the same way. So as you can see, we're going to have that cross. I think I'm going to take my left one, cross over the right one. There's no reason for that other than just that's kind of what I do naturally, so I'm just going to keep with that and not mess up the routine too much and make it more likely to make a mistake. But that means instead of using the working wire that's coming from this side that I'm working on, I'm going to leave that over to the other side and actually use the wire that's coming from the opposite side. But otherwise, I'm going to work on this left side first of all and start with the outer wire here, because the previous knot has that little loop over this outer wire. So what I'm going to do is just make a square knot underneath this bead that I've made sure to push up as well, just the one for now. And then I'm going to take this right wire that we crossed over from the other side and just complete our square knot with these two wires now. And what you just want to make sure to do is that when we do pull this tight, you obviously want to pull the knot nice and tight, but you want to be careful to not pull these two holding wires too tight together and basically change the distance between them. You want to try and keep that consistent throughout. So something like that. And then I'm going to start with the opposite side, because now this wire is coming out underneath, because we need to at least have one full square knot between each bead. So I'm just going to start with that, because that is also how we then cage in the first bead here and make sure that's not going to go anywhere. So what you can also do is kind of brace the wires a little bit with your fingers as you're pulling it tight. And remember, smooth out the wires that you just used by running it through your hands and fingers. So here we now have one full square knot. Now what we're doing next is up to you and the pattern that you want. You could easily just leave it at one square knot in between each bead and then keep going like that. What I'm going to do for this is actually 2 square knots, I think, just for something a little bit different from the previous one I made. So while I'm on this side, I might as well just do that straight away. So I'm going to start with that outer side to make the next knot, and then just tighten that straight underneath the previous one. And basically this just creates a little bit more spacing between the beads and also between the X's in the middle. And obviously doing different things will give you slightly different results and a different design. You could also do more, so it will space them out even more, but I'm going to leave it at this for now. So now that I've made those knots, I'm just going to gently push this wire out of the way to try and make sure I don't get tangled up. Now moving to the other side, the first thing I'm going to do is just push up my bead. So that's going to sit right next to the other one on the same level there. And on this side, because I'm on the right side, I'm going to start with the outer wire on this side, which is the right one. So on the left side, I'm starting with the left wire, and on the right side, I'm starting with the right wire. Then I'm going to bring this over the holding wire, and then the left wire is the one that's actually coming from the other side that we crossed over, and this one just happens to be the one that's going over the other one in the middle there. Like I said, that doesn't really matter, other than personally I do prefer to keep it consistent depending on the look that you're going for. But then complete your movement with that wire to make the first half of our square knot and pull that nice and tight. And you can see we've now basically also settled that X in place in between the beads right in the middle. We just need to finish off this knot though by making the other half of it. Just like that. And remember, I'm just doing 2 knots between each bead, so I'm just going to do the next one straight away since I'm on this side anyway. Starting with the outer wire, because that's the one that's coming underneath the loop. Do the first half and then start from the other side to do the other half to get the complete square knot. And pull that tight. So there we go. That's basically now what we're going to be doing throughout, but I'm just going to show you again. So the first thing I'm going to do before I do anything else is cross over these 2 middle working wires and just make sure they're crossing over in the direction that I want them to, so it's done and I'm less likely to make mistakes. And for me, I'm just going to do the left one going over the right one consistently every time. So they are in position now and have swapped sides again. So they're going to constantly swap sides throughout as we cross them. And then I'm going to start on my left side. Just push up the bead first of all. And remember, we're starting on the left side with the outer left wire. So that goes over first, and then the other one that is actually coming from the other side, but they've swapped places, so that goes over that underneath everything in the middle and up through the loop. And then we start to pull these tight, and again, just make sure we don't pull too tight. We want to try and keep the distance here in the middle between the two sides as consistent as possible, and then just finish off the square knot to fasten it all in place by starting with the other side and making the other half of the knot. And pull that nice and tight. And again, because I'm making 2 square knots in this pattern, I'm just going to do the second one here straight away. Save some time because I'm already here. So make the first half, pull it tight, and then make the other half and pull that tight. So this side is done now for this little section. Moving over to the other side, again, first thing I'm just going to push up that bead, so that's in place. And on the right side, I'm going to start with my right wire, so the outer one, and then the inner one is actually the one coming from the other side, creating that X in the middle. I'm going to complete the knot and then pull that nice and tight, and again, not too tight, because if you do too tight, you're going to, like I said, pull them more towards each other and make it a little bit more uneven. But you need to make the other half of the knot. To fasten it in place completely. Just like that. And again, I'm just making the second knot straight away. So make the first half, pull that nice and tight, and then make the other half and pull that nice and tight. So there we now have a second section with our little cross. So I'm just going to keep going like this. You can see we're constantly then swapping from side to side with each section that we do, and I just like the rhythm of then now moving to the next section. First of all, I just want to cross the wires over so they're ready and in position, and then I start with my left side, push the bead up, finish that, then go to the right side, push the bead up and finish that, and then that section is done. And that's just my routine of doing that throughout. Of course, you can find your own, but then do this for however long you want your bracelet to be. Of course, you can do other things as well. Like I said, you can do 1 square knot, you can do more, you can play around with these wires in the middle, cross them over and under in other directions, purposely opposite to each other, and maybe use different colors of wire. So there's loads of options for this design here that you can customize it with. Now, bearing in mind you need the length that you want your bracelet to be minus the clasp that you're going to add to it. So I've now reached the other end here, got the length that I want, and I'm about to add in my last 2 beads, one on either side. And in the process of doing that, I'm also going to start finishing off this end of the bracelet. So what we basically want is for this end to look like it does in the beginning. So we first of all want to just get everything in the right position. So we continue the same pattern there. And I'm going to then make knots on the other side of the beads, just like I've been doing throughout, to cage them in place. So exactly the same, make your square knot here. And then what we're going to do on the other side of the beads is no longer the same thing that we've been doing between the beads. We want to create this kind of graduation into a narrower point again, which means we're going to create a length of knots on either side and then bring them together. And I'm just going to do the same amount as I have in the beginning so they become as similar as possible. So for me that was 3 knots, so I'm doing the same here. You can count your knots with those little loops on one side. So I have 3, and then I'm just going to go to the other side and finish that off in the same way. So first of all, cage in the bead by making your square knot. You can see this is also going to be the last X we're going to have in the middle. And then we just finish off the knot with the other half. And then I'm also going to make 3 knots on this side. So I have my first one, I need to make another 2. So I have my 3 knots on this side and the 2 sides nicely match up. And then what we need to do is start bringing them together. So I'm going to release the holding wires so we can actually add an angle into these. So you kind of just want to grab your knots right after the bead and start to push them a bit towards each other, so the ends will more or less meet up and be something a bit like that. Now we then need for the holding wires to come straight back down, but this time they're going to be together basically, and also then end up just being put into the same slot. But what I'm also going to do is take the 2 inner working wires and bring them in with the holding wires as well. And again, I like to make sure that the working wires stay in the middle in between the holding wires, and then just put them all into the same slot on the bottom there. And now we're going to make sure this all stays together by making square knots around them all, just like we did in the beginning with the 2 remaining working wires. So just start with one side and make sure that we go underneath everything in the middle so we don't miss any of the wires here. Making sure those working wires stay in the middle, and then just pull that as tight as you can up here at the top. Now what you then also can do is, if you find that these working wires are sticking out a little bit too far, you can always, as you're making your knots, just grab onto one at a time and just pull it down slightly to kind of settle it more in place. Put them back in the slot, but otherwise continue your knot. Need to make the other half of this first one underneath everything in the middle, and then pull this second half tight, and you'll be able to then pull that even tighter so the knot really becomes as tight as possible. And then again, you just want to make the same amount of knots on this section here as we have on the other end. And for me, that is again 3 square knots. And we basically finished making all a macrame now. So we can remove this from our board. And this is then what our piece looks like so far. So we have all our pattern going all the way along. We finished off both ends nicely there. And all that's left to do is finish off the ends of our wires and obviously add a clasp so we can actually wear it. Now what we're going to do is start with our working wires, and I'm just going to show you on one end because it's the same on both. So I'm just going to separate out my working wires from the holding wires here. And like I said, I have my working wires more in the middle of my 2 holding wires. So I'm just bringing one at a time, just forward a little bit so I can get my cutters in there, because I'm just going to put my cutters right up against that very last knot that we made and just cut off the excess. And it's still going to be nice and secure, because these lengths have been used to make knots with, and they're coming in through some of the knots as well, so they're not going to come undone. And I'm just going to do the other working wire as well, like that. Cut that off and get rid of them. We can just bring these 2 back. Now I'm then going to do the 2 working wires coming from the very last knot next, and what you're going to see is just where these wires are coming out from that knot. Now this one on this side here is coming out more towards the back because that's where it has that loop coming over it, and on the other side this one is coming out more towards the front of the knot. So just one at a time, I'm going to just grab the one from the opposite side, bring it over the knot to the other side, and then that little loop, you should have a little bit of space, enough to be able to take the end of the wire here and just push it through. So now this is going to come out towards the back of the knot. Just pull it down a little. I'm going to take the one on the other side and do the same thing, bring it across to the other side of the knot, and then go through that little loop on the opposite side. So that now is coming out towards the front. And then we just want to pull them tight, which then means that these working wires are actually now wrapping around the base wires here, or the holding wires, within that very last knot. So it's going to help secure them off. And then I'm just going to wrap them over the top of the knot, kind of towards the opposite side, but not go through one more time because there isn't really space to do that. So instead what I'm going to do is go in and cut off the excess on the side that they're going towards, just right around where the knot ends as well. So like that. And the other one, cut the excess off, and then I'm going to grab my Tweezernose pliers, and you're going to have a little end of the wire here that we can just grab with our pliers, and literally just grab the end, and then I like to do a little flick with my wrist downwards towards the knot, so it's now pointing inwards towards the knot there, and we can push it flat, and then the end of the wire is going to basically be hidden within the knot itself. Just flip it around, do the same on the other thing, and that way we finish off the wires, but we're also making sure that first of all it's secure and shouldn't come undone, but also the ends aren't sticking out and at risk of catching or scratching on any skin or clothes. So just put your finger over them to make sure you can't feel the ends. And then we just have our two holding wires left. So one of them I'm going to use to make a wrap loop with that we can attach our findings to, and the other one I'm going to finish off now. So just take whichever one you prefer, and I'm just going to kind of push it down towards the knot and then start wrapping it around the other holding wire right up against where the knot is. And then once I've wrapped it a couple of times and it's coming out towards the back here, I'm going to cut off the excess like that, and always make sure to squeeze down the end so it's not going to stick out and catch our skin or our clothes or anything. Now we have this one length left, which is what I'm going to use to make our wrap loop with. So just grab your pliers and place them a little bit above where that wrap is that we just made, and I'm holding onto it sideways here. So I'm going to put about a 90-degree bend into it like that. Take my 6-step bell making pliers or round nose pliers if that's what you're using, place them on the bend, bring the tail around the pliers to create a full circle like that. I like to then grab on to that circle with my pliers to make sure it stays in its place and in the shape that I want it to have, while I then take the tail here and wrap around below the circle, filling in that little gap that we left initially, and until this meets up with the wrap that we did before and you don't have any more space. Now coming towards the back, I'm going to go and cut off the excess just like before, and then again just make sure to squeeze down the very end. And then of course you need to just go to the other end of the bracelet and do all the same things to get rid and finish off this end here. So now both ends are finished off and I've attached my clasp. Then we just need to shape it so it fits around our wrist, of course. So you can either shape it around something like a bracelet mandrel that has the size and shape you want it to have, or you can use your hands and fingers. Make sure that the side you want to be the front is facing outward, and then just go in from one place and work your way from side to side. Start putting a bend into it gradually. So don't put a big bend into one place because it'll kind of more go out of shape, but just work your way gradually back and forth until we get the two ends closer to each other and close enough that we can actually use the clasp like that. And then you have your bracelet finished and ready to wear. So we end up with this really cool design that is actually very customizable, both depending on the materials that you're using, but also how you choose to put the design through the main part of the bracelet together, like I explained earlier. And I also think this can very much be a unisex bracelet. Now don't forget, these bracelets will be available for sale in my shop, along with other jewelry kits and tutorials. And while you're there, you can sign up to my newsletter. And also, if you like wire macrame designs, I have loads more on my channel, along with other mediums as well. So feel free to check that out. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.